Hello to everybody, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar, which is Securing Industrial Environments in the Age of COVID-19. It's delivered today by Applied Risk and Jalal, the founder and CEO, and Auke, the director of EU and OT Security Services, and they will introduce themselves shortly to you. And just wanted to go through a few things. I'm sure most of you have attended a webinar before, but there will be a chance to ask some questions at the end of this presentation. And if you have those questions, please feel free to type them in the question pane throughout so that you don't forget any coming up to the end. And we can get those questions asked for you. And if you have any questions of us throughout, then please feel free to type into the question pane with regards to the webinar. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to your presenters. Take care.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for attending this webinar and giving us also the opportunity to share with you some of the work that we have been doing in this space, mainly around trends and some of the development that we're seeing in industrial environments in the light of the COVID situation. So for starting, I would like just to walk you through what we're preparing today in terms of the decisions. So we'll try to give you an overview about the current cyber risk for the OT environments, some of the challenges that we have been seeing in this space based on conversation with our clients and partners, and some of the recommendation also for mainly asset owners, but also as I'm aware that for CREST we have here different organization also on the consulting part. So I think there will be certainly some recommendation in this area. And of course, we'll wrap up this meeting with a Q&A session. So definitely looking for an interactive session with you all. So maybe for those of you who's not familiar with Applied Risk, we are in the business of industrial cybersecurity. We're a Dutch entity. We've been in this space since 2012. Our key focus is really on the industrial control system and industrial Internet of Things. We have been helping different customers and clients in this space. Majority of our customers are in the industrial, so mainly oil and gas, power, and as you can see, the list here is extended. So I think we have around 15 sectors that we are serving at the moment globally. So and as part of this platform, I think we are very excited and delighted also to give you an overview and a kind of situational awareness about what's happening in this space. I'm the founder of Applied Risk, and I have also a background in the cybersecurity, and over the last 15 years, I was active in industrial environments. Yeah, so that's all about me. Auke, would like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Jalal. Yeah, Auke Huistra. I'm since 4 years partner at Applied Risk. Have been working also about 15 to 20 years now in the cybersecurity space. I've been leading the ISACs in the Netherlands for many years before they were handed over to the National Cybersecurity Center, and worked in this space in many companies, amongst a few major oil and gas companies, as well as a Dutch research organization called TNO. Yeah, my main focus within Applied Risk is risk management and workforce development. From that perspective, I'm also one of the founders of the GICSP certification that you might know.
Thank you, Auke. So I think maybe to start and just to give you a kind of context about where this work is coming from. So we have initially started, I think in March of this year, some discussions with mainly the asset owners and operators within industrial environments about the impact of the COVID-19, and also by examination of some of the resources that are available at the moment. We have also reached out to some of the peers in the industry, just to understand what has been changed and what's the impact for critical infrastructure, especially with the COVID impacts. I think this result of this work has been translated to this white paper, which covers some of the analysis as well as some of the recommendation that we would like to share with you. So the link is provided here for those who have not downloaded the papers. We would like to invite you to have a look at it. We hope that will serve you in many ways. So that's really the background of this paper and also this presentation. So before starting, then we would like just to ask a question: what has been changed with COVID-19, especially for industrial environment? I think the answer here that we are really entering a new era where there are a lot of new things that have been introduced. As you might know, for industrial environments, there are certain specifications and that are related to those industries when it comes to the availability of their assets, but also for areas like remote access and business continuity. So those are practices that are done in certain way, which means that majority of those end users and operators found themselves dealing with a new type of working, but also new type of risks. And those risks are based on the of course the sector and the environment that they are operating at. So we'll try to dive into this part, but I see here that we have also tried to capture one of the questions just to understand what this COVID-19 crisis is introducing to this environment. So we have the first poll questions that we would like to appreciate and get also your feedback on that.
Okay, I'm closing it. We've got 90% of people have voted. That's brilliant. Thank you, everybody.
Excellent.
Very interesting, actually. So 32% said two-factor authentication, 0% firewalls, 4% data diode, 7% others, and 57% none.
I think it's clear that the two-factor authentication was higher on as kind of controls implemented, as well as data diodes. So I think interesting to see that organization are, or at least from this poll, that the firewalls were not considered here as a kind of security countermeasure to help with during this COVID-19. For a lot of organizations, nothing has been changed, but for others, I think the way of working with the remote access, with the lack of resources and shortage of people that can go to the site, I think those are some of the challenges that we have seen. So, which means that also finding the trade-off between the security and keeping also the operation, especially in this industrial environment, is one of the key challenges that a lot of organizations were facing. So, where to start? I think it's really about understanding the risk and potential impact that can be affecting this environment. Also understanding the type of controls that are in place, but most importantly, understanding if there are any gaps that can be mitigated. And this can be done, especially for this for the OT environment, working closely within the organization, but also partners, especially with suppliers. So the impact was there also when it comes to the architecture. So how the whole architecture and the blueprint for this environment between the different levels or layers of the OT. So really from the production environment to the IT part up to the cloud. And of course, what's the role of those key systems that we have here? So mainly the key control systems, so including safety and others. So how those will be served and maintained and so forth. So those are some of the questions and that a lot of organizations were raising during this COVID-19, and it did impact also the way of how they were perceiving the risk for this environment. Auke, do you want to add anything here?
No, I think that it's the complete story. It's also curious about the results from the poll, because there were a lot of people that said that they didn't change anything. So of course we can't have an interactive discussion, but we have seen clients that indeed didn't change anything. Some of them because they already had a really good solutions in place. For example, for remote access. Others also didn't change anything, but that was more because they were not really aware of the risks that were out there. So then that's also based on what Jalal just mentioned. I think in that new normal, it's really important to understand the potential risks. And with that, I also review the current situation implemented to see if it's still mitigating the risks properly to the right residual risk that you would like to have as a company, or that more is needed and extra implementation of extra tools, procedures, techniques will be needed.
So I fully agree with you, okay. I think just let me tell you about one of the story that we had with one of our clients. That, I mean, for them, the way of working remotely, especially for the OT environment, was new and kind of challenging and not really in line with their policy. So the reality for this environment, majority of the work that needs to happen at the plants. So the contractors or people need to go to the sites from time to time if there is any challenges that from maintenance or support from the vendors. That the only occasion where they will open this remote access. So when it comes to the assessment of those interfaces, so we found out that some of the customers were very careful about testing and evaluating this environment. So this is also one of the elements that was new for us. So which means that you're accepting the risk instead of going and evaluating about what are potential risks that you might have about those systems that are internet or public facing. So that was kind of one of the observation that we had. Those certain organizations that are accepting to keep the operation running and accepting this risk. So those are some of the observations that we had here. So looking at the next slide, and from I think earlier of this year, I think it's for some of organization, it has been no changes or impact, at least not a major one. In fact, we've seen a lot of organizations that they had a higher productivity and a lot of improvement in different areas because of the remote work and so forth. But we appreciate in the meantime that for other organizations, it was kind of, it's like a disconnect from the day-to-day activities. So really not only from the remote access, but also from the operational type of activities at the site. So how do you maintain a kind of protocol where the day-to-day activities can happen with the minimum people, and how to focus on the most important activities? I think we have seen some challenges here in this area. So I think the COVID-19 impact is definitely real and had somehow impact on different organizations. And I guess for all of us here, we have had somehow kind of direct or indirect impacts in this context. So for next slides, please. It starts with the situational awareness. I think from a risk perspective, and I think for the bad guys, I think COVID-19 or without COVID-19, the risk is there, the threat is there, and I think this was also very interesting opportunity for a lot of threat actors to go and look also for weaknesses to whether exploit certain vulnerabilities that might be exposed there. I think remote working bring a lot of challenges also for a lot of organizations. So especially for people that are, end users that are not well trained and aware of risks. And we're seeing also that cyber criminals are also capitalizing on this situation, especially with the phishing type of attacks, but also we've seen some ransomware attacks that had a number of organizations. So it depends really on the sectors. The risk is still there, and which means that we have all to be vigilant. And I think when it comes to the industrial environment, those are very lucrative environments, and I think increasingly becoming a very nice target for a lot of threat actors. So when it comes to the top priorities, and this is really I think always a dilemma to have this trade-off and balance between the day-to-day operations, the production type of environment. So I think what we have captured in our discussion with a lot of asset owners and system integrators, that of course the safety is first, which means keeping people safe and their assets up and running and safe. That's really a top priority for a lot of organizations. So continuation of operations, so which means that meeting the type of SLAs and market demands that they have in place, but also keeping track on operational efficiency. So we have seen cost cutting taking place. We've seen a lot of new trends trying to achieve more with less, squeezing some type of activities, but most importantly focusing on top priorities. I guess that's a kind of normal behavior for a lot of organizations in these circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's also some dilemmas in here. For example, the first one, keeping people and assets safe. That's on the one hand, companies have built up a whole structure and a way of working with people on site, some controlling measures in place. But now in these times, of course, you don't want to have too many people on site. Also to keep people safe in the sense that they don't get infected with the COVID-19, for example. So also there some safety related procedures needed to be changed, and some oversight on activities need to be changed as well. So there were quite some dilemmas in here for certain companies.
So one of the aspects that you can see on this picture that we have from this control room. So for certain of our clients, that the challenge was for them not only on cybersecurity, but just how to keep the guys in charge of operations, especially the operators. That's what's the protocol that will be in place if they want to change shifts, for example, when it comes to the keyboards and the distance between the operators and so forth. Those are some of the dilemmas that a lot of organizations had to go and find a way of working around it. But we've seen in some other countries that people that are in charge of the critical infrastructure had the opportunity, and I think from a government perspective, to still conduct their activities and have also support whether for their families and their kids to still be able to conduct their day-to-day activities. So I think that's was something that we've seen in certain countries, but I don't think that was kind of generic for a lot of regions. So those are some of the new aspects that have been directly impacting a lot of organizations. So what does it mean? If we look at the real challenges for this environment, really from cybersecurity, so I think there are some elements that were there. Nothing has been changed, but there are some additional elements that are adding kind of burden for this organization, that they have to deal with this COVID-19, but in meantime that you have to keep maintaining your cybersecurity at the highest level. So if we look at the next slide, we have captured some of the key trends and challenges in this space. So remote access was really on top of agenda for a lot of organizations. So some of the organizations had this already in place, well implemented, secured, and so forth. But some other organizations had really to start from scratch, had to go back and look at their architectures and also especially for the OT part, how to do this and how to implement this in a very secure manner. On the infrastructure and maintenance, we appreciate that organizations were faced with challenges about maintaining their key components. So those daily and weekly and monthly type of activities had really to be done in different ways. Sometimes they had really to focus only on the key priorities in this area. So patching, for example, and update of certain systems was also one of the challenges that a lot of organizations were facing here in this space. And as there are restrictions also for working on site, we've seen also that shortage of resources due to the protocols that are in place for those organizations, as well as for safety precautions. So those are some of the elements that has been captured, and we've seen those were kind of impacting directly or indirectly some of the clients that we've been working with in this area. So from this part, we have also another question with regards to the remote access, and especially for access and privilege that will be provided for the OT environment. So do you have, or do you believe that organization had to elevate remote access privilege to process within the OT environment? So the choice between answers is yes, no, and sure.
The results are 18% yes, 59% no, and 23% unsure. So thank you for voting, everyone.
Excellent, and I think this result is good and indicates that also that for a lot of organizations that remote access is one of areas, especially for OT environment, that require very careful consideration because of the risk. So yeah, so I think I didn't expect any other answer than this. So I think it's in line with our expectations. Auke, do you think that, or do you have a different opinion?
No, I don't have a different opinion. So that's indeed to be expected.
Excellent. So let's move on to the next part. And I think in terms of the threat landscape, I think we're still dealing with the same type of threat actors. So internal one, and I think appreciate that some of the terms will sound like overhyped or kind of fad, but I think we will just keep it to the normal one. So I think in terms of external threat actors, we should not underestimate, especially the criminal type of activities that are really going after the monetary part. So those are people that are organizing at the moment type of ransomware campaign. This is really what we are seeing at the moment as the biggest threat for a lot of organizations. Of course, other type of threat actors that are motivated by whether geopolitical type of motivations and what you like. So I think that this is really what we're seeing. Of course, on the internal or the insiders, this is a risk that, or at least threat that will be always there. But it's less than what we're seeing from based on statistics that we will share with you in the next slides. Looking at from this trade landscape, I think we have some clear conclusions and also statistics that we have captured in the next slides. One of them is, if we can go please to the next slide. I think one of them is the analysis that, especially of what we call the Bouhdada assessments, how certain aspect has been changed from a threat perspective. I think in relation to the controllers and so forth, I will ask my colleague Auke, which is an expert in the Bouhdada assessments. Auke, do you want to provide some clarity about this?
Yes, of course. Maybe first a bit about the bow tie, because I'm not sure if everyone in the call is familiar with the concept of it. It's actually coming from the world of safety, where they used the bow tie more or less to express the type of barriers that you would need to take to prevent certain consequences at the end. So if you look at the bow tie, you have some threat scenarios on the left that can lead to what is called a top event. So we called it here a security breach, but you can also be more specific, for a virus infection or something like that. And that can then also lead, because the top event itself is not a problem yet, but if it leads to certain consequences, and we've listed a few here, like HSC damage or unplanned disruption or product deferment of loss, can also be financial impact or all these kind of things, environmental impact. This is a way to more or less visualize how external threats, internal threats, or threat scenarios, different threat scenarios can lead to a top event leading to consequences. The basis of that bow tie is then that you put barriers into place. On the one hand, to prevent or to at least lower the likelihood that the top event will occur. So by adding, for example, network segmentation between IT and OT, you can limit the likelihood that an external malicious external user will enter through the IT environment to the OT environment, for example. Also by implementing logging and monitoring, that can also detect already in an early stage these kind of intrusions, and then also stop the security breach from happening. But there are, of course, sometimes the barriers will be passed, and that security breach will happen. And then you have other barriers in place to lower the impact or the consequence of the top event. So you have barriers that you can put in front, and you have some barriers here, and all of them work together in more or less lowering the impact on the business. And then at the same time, you have a few other controls in place that are more or less supporting what you see up here. This is a model that we use a lot with our customers to do risk analysis, and also to calculate the effectiveness of these barriers, to create an interesting set of barriers altogether to prevent the most thinkable scenarios from happening to the organization, and at the end lower the residual risk to something that is it's often called in oil and gas, for example, a LARP, as low as reasonable practicable, but zero the residual risk will never be zero, but it will at least lower it to a level that is acceptable to the organization. So if you use the same model, if you can go to the next slide. If you look at that model, and then from a COVID-19 perspective, you see several things. On the one hand, you see that these threat scenarios might change. So there are different threats out there, sometimes threats that already existed. Like, for example, if you look at phishing campaigns, they already exist for a long time, but they now also use COVID-19 as an interesting content to lure people working at companies also into going into these campaigns. So that's on the one hand going on. On the other hand, also some barriers will change. So the effectiveness of some of the barriers might change if you don't do anything. For example, if you look at detection and logging, If you have rules established to detect everything which is anomalous within a network, it's well possible that because of the network patterns change, people come into the organization in a different way. You will have to look at different patterns than you did before, and if you don't, this barrier will be less effective than it was. Same goes for network segmentation. So here we, for example, talk about network segmentation within the OT domain. And so you have segmentation between IT and OT, but you have also segmentation within the OT domain. Especially now, a lot of organizations have chosen to make it possible to enter the OT domain from the outside. Some of the controls that were in front of that, and also checked if people that came into the OT domain were the right ones. The effectivity of that might have gone down, but that also means that maybe you would need to put in more segmentation within your OT domain than you did before to safeguard certain areas that need to be restricted more than that it had been done before. Same goes if you look here below at third parties. And we know we work for some companies that for certain activities always ensured that the third parties came on site so they could work on the systems while they had some oversight from the company itself. But now in this situation, you might not want that, and then you want these same third-party companies work remotely, and so that also poses again some new things that you have to think about. So how to, for example, ensure that the right people from that third-party company do the activities and not people that you don't want them to do that. Also here, for example, in the whole incident response, disaster recovery part, also that has changed. So scenarios have changed. Some business continuity plans or incident response plans have changed because people cannot easily come together, sit around the table and discuss about incidents, or being flown in to do forensics on site. So also there you need to reconsider the procedures that are used, and ideally also train and practice them. Yeah, based on all what I said before, of course, the residual risk might change if you haven't done anything or changed some of the barriers here. So actually what you would need to do is to do a proper risk analysis to see what the new situation with less people on site, with other access paths into the organization, what that will do for the risk calculated before. So this bow tie gives also a good way, at least in our opinion, to discuss these type of items within the company, also to the higher management, because that's of course often one of the things that that needs to be done to bring the message that the risk has grown due to this situation in simple, understandable terms that are not too technical.
Absolutely, and I think Auke, one of the elements that you have here is really the top events that you know this is really what every organization is trying to avoid, that you have a kind of security incident or breach. However, I think those we can only work hard to make it difficult, but we still see that those incidents can happen, and when it happens, then you want to be well prepared to respond on timely manner. So if we look to the some of the statistics that we have, and this is just to demonstrate also that this can, I mean, incidents can happen to any organization. But I think if we look at the OT environments, I think we have captured some of the statistics that we have developed within organizations. So if we look at the next slide, those are unfortunately some of the top events that's happened to several organizations. I would like to invite you to have a look at starting from March this year. If you can see that the number of incidents that are taking place are increasing. So from different energy organization in Europe to power utilities in Africa, oil and gas companies in Middle East, for example. So up to Australia, we've seen some number of especially ransomware type of attack. I think there is also here some kind of geopolitical type of clash between Iran and Israel here. Of course, those are based on some of the statistics that or information that we have captured. We don't know for sure, but I think those are kind of incident that happen in the industry and coming also from trustworthy sources. So I think we're seeing that the trend, this is definitely increasing, and it means that we have to work very hard as industry to protect our environment, and especially for critical infrastructure and OT type of environments. As I said, this is becoming more and more lucrative type of target environments. Can we go please to the next slide? So what's the potential impact for this industry environment? I think that's really varies per sector. I think so for some of the verticals, they care about the production lines and damage to the equipment, but also on the process side, as well as the impact on safety. So all those elements are very valid, and usually we see that the impact can affect assets, people, environments, reputation, of course, as well as safety of this environment. So I think that's also what's different about industrial environment than IT. So whatever happen in the digital part of your OT will be potentially having impact on the physical process. So looking at the next slide, I think it's pretty much some of the other key sectors that are very important and critical. Water, for example, electricity supply, pipeline, and I think we have in our statistic also some events about some of the pipeline incidents. I think this is really very concerning, and the risk is, and especially the impact and consequences can be very severe here in this environment. So looking same for the next slide, there is more on some of the vital sectors at the moment, so transportation, but most importantly at the moment, the healthcare. So we've seen some attacks against certain hospitals, especially in those difficult times of Corona. So I think this is really, I think the conclusion here that the impact is can have different kind of levels, but at the end of that, it doesn't matter which kind of sector we are kind of into this together. So that's really what's where we're coming from. So in terms of where to go from here, what's the recommendation that we are providing for our asset owners, suppliers, and the whole industry at the moment? So I think there are some practical recommendations that we are providing here. So it's really about focusing on the baseline. It's really focusing on the foundation. We don't believe in any silver bullets here in this environment, which means that you need to understand your risk. You need to put the proper security controls and countermeasure in place, not only for the remote work, but also on all aspects. So I think from the bow tie, those are some of the controls that we are been deploying with our customers, and I think the ones that we've been working with them really they showed a lot of confidence in the way how they are working. I think increasing also the prevention is very important, and I think for this platform, CREST, I think penetration testing and vulnerability assessment is really something that can help here, but also the readiness on the response and incident response. So having the right capabilities or calling the right partners when it comes to the incident response and forensics. rethinking and enhancing your security architecture as organization, I think it's worth just to ask question, where are we now, and which kind of asset do we have, what are we protecting, and what does mean for our current architecture and future, I mean, in the light of the COVID-19. And last but not least is really preparation, practicing, simulation on the offensive part and on defensive part, having those scenarios for testing and validating and improving your incident response plan is the only thing that can help you here. So I think that's really what we would like to recommend here as the five key steps that can help the organizations in the OT environments. So I'm pretty sure that there are other countermeasures that can be taken in consideration, but in very high level, I think we need to stay sharp, we need to stay vigilant, and that's really the key, just to make it difficult for the bad guys. So I think we would like to invite you, as we have a link here in the next slide, to download the white paper, have a look at it, and of course we'll be at your disposition if there are any questions or areas that might require further clarification. So with that, we will be more than happy to take questions if there are any.
And there are a couple of questions that have come in, and as I say, to everyone, I know you've been listening intently, and thank you for that great presentation. And if you do have any questions, then now's your time to ask them. So please feel free to type in the pane whilst we're just covering these other questions. So the first one is, what do you think the time horizon is for getting back to normal?
Yeah, so I think that's a very difficult question. I think with my humble opinion, I think we what we're looking in terms of trends and developments around us, I think there is a change. A lot of things has been changed, and going back to normal is really a tough one. So I don't believe personally that we will go to normal very soon. So it depends on the regions. So we are seeing that going back fully to normal is kind of varies per region, but also per sectors. On the positive side, we're seeing some very good development where some of the clients, and I mean, looking also at our organization, I think we are gradually going back to the normal. But I think the question that I would like to ask here, what is the normal? A lot of things has been changed at the moment, and you know, it just sounds very weird going back to normal. So Auke?
That would also be my perspective, and I think ways of working have changed because of COVID, and also some ways of working actually work quite well. So there's also some things that are now being developed that previously, especially in a world that's quite conservative, would never have been possible. So I think also looking at that, a lot of companies will start keeping some of, especially for example, the remote working options available. Having less people traveling around the world, even in these kind of environments. So also there, I think that also the good things that we get out of this crisis will also be kept. So I think the normal will be different than it was before. Yeah, and what exactly when we are back in a bit of a normal state, it's even difficult for the world political leaders to decide on that. So I'm not sure when that exactly will happen.
Lovely. Well, thank you for answering that one. Moving on to another one. Are there any thoughts on mitigating supply chain risks, strategies for the same?
I guess for supply chain for the OT environment, it's probably will not see a lot of changes there, at least for activities that will require work at the sites and plants. And of course, this will depend if we're talking about greenfield or brownfield type of environments. However, trends that we're seeing at the moment around some of the other developments and for the cloud and so forth. So we're seeing some trends and some of them bringing also some challenges in terms of risks. But I think we've been working also with some of the clients about how to keep the same type of requirements that we have for the suppliers and working with them also remotely. So I think I can share with you that some of the factory acceptance testing, for example, and site acceptance testing have been taking place remotely. So I think that's where organizations are trying also to be creative. But I guess that the control will become very difficult on the supply chain. I mean, in the current circumstances. So this is something that will require also some kind of more attention and consideration, because we know that supply chain can be can be also a key area of risk in these environments.
Lovely, thank you for that. So moving on to the next question, because they're starting to come through quite quickly now. Have you seen any specific examples of increased threat actor activity beyond the norm in this environment? Also, do you see your customers are more now keen on locking in improvements and mitigations, or more hesitant?
Generally speaking, we've seen that some of the industries are more targeted in these circumstances. Usually what we're seeing, and this is really not the biggest concern for our client in the OT space, so the type of phishing attacks to the IT part and so forth, it's more, of course, it can affect them, but it's more affecting the first barrier that they have on the IT part. I think we're seeing that on certain industries, manufacturing and pharma especially. I think we are aware of that, some of the targeted attacks against this type of organization purely because of the race on vaccine, and I think there are some threat actors that are trying to penetrate this organization. So I'm aware that certain companies are taking additional countermeasure just to monitor their networks and prevent any kind of intrusion for these environments.
Especially on the barrier between IT and OT, it's where we see a lot of extra mitigating actions, especially for the companies that have their remote access going through from IT to OT, because they are afraid for these phishing type of infections, leading at least to access to the IT domain. So that's what you see in daily practice, plus some extra monitoring on certain external links as well.
So what do you think about remote assessment and pen test, and how we can mitigate the risk of these situations?
So I as stated in my slides, I think on the recommendation, we do believe that on vulnerability assessment and penetration testing remotely is something that will help the organization, especially from a prevention perspective in many ways. I think we have understood from a lot of organizations that worry about conducting this type of assessment, especially for OT environment. I think we've been able to demonstrate and prove to those some of the clients that we've been doing work with them in the past that's not a challenge. But for some of the new organization, I think that's something that can help them in many ways without impact to their production environments. I think there are different ways for conducting remote assessment, as long as you can do it in a passive mode without leveraging any tools that can be kind of impacting this production environment. So I think that's something that will help, because if you discover these vulnerabilities, that's what the bad guys most of the time are exploiting. So I think from a prevention, we do believe that the penetration testing can help here in many ways, not only for the external networks, but also on the internal one, as long as you do it in a proper way and you understand also the nature and specification of the OT environments.
Yeah, and also if the customer has really good remote access solutions to facilitate it. because I think that's also an important thing to consider. So we work for clients that have that, and then you can do it in a secure way, with almost all the possibilities that you would normally have as well. It's really important to discuss with the customer, as Jalal said, to discuss the test strategy, and also make clear decisions on what not to test. So, for example, which VLANs to leave out there, and maybe pick them up during shutdown periods. But it's definitely possible.
Lovely, thank you very much for that. And I'll make this the last question, because I know we have run over time, but we did have a little technical hitch in the middle. So this one is, what is your experience? Are decision makers for OT aware of such cyber risk? Do you see any action from them to mitigate these risks?
Yeah, we clearly see, at least at our customers, that these OT managers are aware of the cyber risks. It's also often one of the reasons that they start working with parties of us, of course. We also see broader in the market that it depends a bit on geography, type of organization, sectors, where that awareness is really there, and where it's still on a lower level. Because there are certain sectors that already deal with this for a long time. Also, by the way, if you look at oil and gas, we're really far ahead in this space compared to some other sectors. Of course, you see there also now with the low oil price that some of the barriers that were there are lifted a bit, because of from a financial perspective, leading to a bit more risk here and there. But there is definitely awareness at most parts. I think that a lot of initiatives like critical infrastructure, you have the information exchanges and the ISACs, etc., where a lot of these companies work together with the government on these kind of issues, but also upcoming legislation has also opened up the eyes for especially management, since they now need to also to show compliance to certain standards or frameworks. So I think what we see is that there is definitely an increase in awareness, but also that some sectors are still lagging behind and opening up their eyes on this topic.
I will just say a big thank you to everybody that attended the webinar today, and thank you to Ali Andrews for organising this as well, and thank you for your contribution to the polls as well, because that really helps, and it helps for the presenters to get some feedback on that. So thank you very much. Take care. If you have any questions, then please feel free to get in touch with CREST, or you can get in touch with Applied Risk Direct. Okay then, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thanks for attending. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.